What we are hoping to begin a series this month which specifically deals with the nature and at times the circumstances throughout its history of the esoteric tradition, and primarily in the Western world, whereby I mean the world culture which originated in the Mediterranean region. And we need to keep in mind that just because that is what we are concentrating on for selfish reasons, because we are the outcome of the same, just because of that we are certainly not denying that esoteric traditions and practices of similar character and the same value that may have arisen in other places and other cultures are not in the world and are not worth studying. It's just that we sort of have to take one segment at a time. Now, since the latter part of the 19th century, there has been an increasing awareness of at least two principal trends of thought that may be defined also as traditions in our culture. And they have often been called, I think probably for the first time by Madame Blavatsky, as the exoteric and the esoteric tradition. These are very much like Jung's two big, major personality types, the extroverted and the introverted, so that possibly the extroverted would represent one particular tradition and the introverted another. But these are all just really playing with words and are not of very great significance. But the fact of the matter is that if we look at various historical periods with a keen interest and some degree of interior insight, then we will not fail to see that in addition to the majority positions of the people, particularly regarding spiritual matters, there was also always a minority position, and that this minority position, at least to some of us, is far more interesting and far more valuable, and probably in the long run more promising than the exoteric traditions can be. The main reason for that probably is, I'll have to be a little bit tentative here, that the historical changes bring about orientations toward interior and psychospiritual things which are subject to influence and to change. They always have been. Only for the most part in the past, these influences were from the field of religion. So that, let us say, if you were looking for esoteric, exoteric, I don't know, in the year 2000, it would have been very greatly influenced by the majority religions in the Mediterranean area and beyond, and their formulation of spiritual approaches and things of that description. But as we well know, the time moves very quickly. Tempora mutantur, as we said in Latin, and added to it et nos mutamur in illis, and we change within the times. So that is always there, and it is more noticeable and more influential over a period of time than the esoteric might be, because the exoteric traditions in the culture are organized around the interests, even the fads and the preoccupations of very large numbers of people, while such is not the case with the esoteric tradition. And therefore, it has been a good custom of historical studies and of other forms of historical study, including religious study, which has been my field when I was teaching academically, that one needs to always take into account when dealing with a particular doctrine, a particular set of mythologies, and approaches to the deeper side of life, that one needs to take into account at what point in history, in what historical period did they originate, because the developing situations, especially in intellectual and spiritual matters, would be of considerable importance in the formation and subsequently in the modifications of these various traditions. All right, now these generalities aside, we need to keep in mind that when we look at the historical development of the both intellectual and spiritual movements in our culture, then we will find not only that there is a development, there are certain changes of emphasis and so forth, but in addition to these, there is always one, when we look very close, there is a sort of a bifurcation, one that is directed for the importance and the value of the interior spiritual nature, psychological nature of humans, and one which is primarily oriented to the stimuli that come the way of humanity in an external fashion. Now, this being the case, it is without a doubt that there was, as far as we can determine, in serious historical and archaeological studies, we can find that for longer than we can unearth documentation, there were really two parallel developments of the mind, of consciousness, of the spirit, and that no matter what the changes in the external circumstances have been, this duality was still always present. And certainly a major explosion. In fact, I have a book published in the 60s, somewhat to my regret. I was in the book myself, I was interviewed myself, and which is called the occult explosion. So you can see as to how I survived that explosion, and I haven't really, my health hasn't really suffered by the explosion that I went through. But let us say, so these developments have always been there. Now, when studying a particular subject, one needs to devote oneself to a considerable, canine voices, hark. You know, I do think, having lived on Beechwood Drive for a very long time, I am inclined to believe that there is a larger canine population on Beechwood Drive than any other street in the Los Angeles area, which might be an indication of various things, one of them being that those of us who live here are really going to the dogs. So that's just an incidental observation. But let us say when we are looking at the development of these traditions, obviously we can avail ourselves of a good deal of information about the openly practiced and advocated big traditions of an intellectual or of a spiritual nature over the history of Western culture. It is a little more difficult to sink our teeth, if I may use that somewhat Transylvanian picture, you know, Draculesque picture, and sinking our teeth into that which that tradition or that part of the overall tradition that was always sort of flowing underneath the surface, but with that flow, just like an underground river, which is a fairly good analogy in this regard, it has been nourishing various, often strange forms of spiritual growth along its course. My old image in that respect is a sort of what you can see in the desert, and I have mentioned that very often, so I don't know why I'm repeating it again, but that you can drive in the desert or ride a train or something in the desert, and you will see there's just nothing there but sand, you know. And yet, all of a sudden, you see that there is a strange line that runs through the countryside, which has usually not very large, but still noticeable greenery. And you see, well, where do these green bushes and cacti and so forth get their nourishment? Obviously, there is an underground body of water, and they grow along the banks of that, even though we cannot see the body of water, and that water nourishes them so that they can go on functioning. So what could be called the esoteric tradition, which, let's say, one way it could be defined that since the beginning of time I had tried to supplant and to increase the understanding of human consciousness regarding certain matters. I mentioned tried because it probably did not always succeed. But in other words, there were always people in the world, wherever they may have found themselves, from the tundras of Siberia to the jungles or to the deserts, who desired and received some stimuli for their consciousness in the course of their lives, which is there a problem? Oh, okay. And who therefore had developed sort of their own approach to the interior side of life, which of course would involve their own interior side too. And so what we need to do, especially somebody who, I was occupied so much of my life with the study of religion, that in addition to the openly available information about mankind's striving for spiritual matters and the means for the accomplishment of that, there was always there an element that somehow was distinguished by its depth and by its synonym for it would be its profundity when compared with the overall populace. And this, to a large extent, then plays into the notion of an esoteric tradition. Now, let's try to simplify these matters and get away from generalities. Let us say, if we look from the point of view of the comparative study of religions, if we look at the basic character and the trust of various spiritual traditions, also known historically as religions, because religio being the Latin word for joining together or joining back, actually back, and the reason why spiritual traditions came to be called religions from a certain time on is that people felt that their endeavor was one of being reconnected with a deeper reality, with a deeper source, with which perhaps the connections had waned and are no longer active. So that the reconnectedness to something deeper, the reconnectedness to something greater, to something more fully satisfying in our psychological nature is very closely connected with this endeavor. Now, if we look at the great world religions, even today, or just the ones that developed sort of our ancestral religions that developed in the Mediterranean basin, we will find that generally the origin, the beginning of things, the beginning of life, the beginning of consciousness, certainly the beginning of humanity, which, owing to the fact that we belong to it, was always of interest to us, that these beginnings came from some mysterious and not readily recognizable source. And that is what gave rise to the notion of revelation. Because when the human mind or just human activities with our little little ceremonies and little musings about the spiritual qualities of the sun and the moon and the planets and so forth would only bring us so far. Then people wanted to discover, all right, beyond all of these data, as they are called now, beyond them, there must be something else. And that is how the interest in and eventually growing into more than interest, but belief in the gods and goddesses came to be popular in humanity, and as the result of these various mythologies and sacred tales, Bibles and whatever we may call them, sacred scriptures, scriptures attempting to describe the indescribable came to be the heritage of humanity. But somehow it happened, and it still is happening, that is, of course, things are different from one historical period to the other, and so I think what is happening now is a variation on the theme, and that is that there are an awful lot of people around, especially in our cultural matrix, who try not to believe in anything that is of an extraordinary nature. And people, we have devised strange expressions like, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, you know. Well, you know what? If you can explain to me what that really means, to my satisfaction, which I'm thinking would be very demanding, then you wouldn't say that. But let's say it is around. So there is a largely secularized culture which still carries many of the vestigial remnants of a spiritually oriented religiosity, but which has sort of lost confidence in itself. And that's probably all that needs to be said about it, because I have just been presented with a large essay written by a Catholic priest, which seems to contain very serious criticisms of the Catholic Church and so forth. So let us say we know that people even who grew up within and maybe had even their professional life within a particular religious matrix often have no confidence in the very background, the psycho-spiritual background from which they have arisen, from which they have come. And that's an unusual situation. But let us say, no matter what historical period we look at, and I would venture to suggest, even although there I'm not talking about experience, because I have not experienced that to any marked degree, that if we were able to penetrate with a kind of psycho-spiritual archaeology other cultures, ancient cultures which have maybe fallen even into disuse and so forth, we would find that the conditions in many ways are similar there. There is a belief system and a system of behavior which is put out with the spiritual with a spiritual keynote, and which tells people what kind of reality they should believe in, and some principles, some maxims, as they are sometimes called, some commandments, which indicate as to what would be the best way for them to live. Especially the best way to live, to be in a synchronous and happy relationship with the supernatural forces that such teachings would bring forth. So that being the case, we need to keep in mind, if we can, sort of in a very brief fashion, because history is also one of my old loves from way back. And before I plunged into religion, I was mainly interested in history, because I saw something moving through history that is not openly available. That if we truly investigated history, we would find a previously secret, at least to us, side to it. That if we investigate history thoroughly, we will come up with certain insights about our worldview that may be very important and also quite interesting. But that being the case, what we have discovered over the ages, that in every culture there are certain commonly accepted and generally followed and believed ways, ideas and practices, but that somehow there is always a stratum of the populace which, when subjected to its own spiritual background, to its religions, to its intellectual trends and things of that sort, is filled with a feeling that something is missing. And I'm sure that if we were able to get into one of those darling time machines and would propel ourselves back to an early period of history, even of our Western world, we would find that there was a substratum of populace that felt there must be more. We are not being told everything. We are not being taught what we should be taught. And we are not given the practices which would really be useful to us and which would really help us. Now, let's say if we project that image to the ancient world, primarily ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and ancient Rome, then we find that if we look thoroughly, we will discover in all of these great cultures that there were some people who were looking for deeper spiritual connections and roots for themselves and for the culture. He said, yes, we have our gods and goddesses, which certainly in the ancient Mediterranean world was quite polytheistic. We have those, but there's still something missing. And so it is with the various scriptures that are told to be revealed, whether it is the Sibylline books in ancient Rome, or whether it is various prophetic literature in the Semitic countries, like in Judaism and so forth. But there is something there that is good and helpful in all of them. But there always were people, and there are people certainly now, and there will be people in the future who will have a deep feeling within themselves. It's a little bit what I'm thinking only of the German word, mein Mangel, being without something, and so that we are still without something. This is not complete. And that is precisely where what we came to call the esoteric tradition enters the picture. Because it, in every age, it was trying to supply elements of a worldview, of a Weltanschauung. I'm now switching over into the German again, which simply means a worldview that is not openly apparent in the culture. Deeply within us, no matter where we are, no matter how we were raised, no matter what spiritual tradition or intellectual disciplines we have been subjected to, deeply within us there is a feeling of Mangel, which is lack. We lack something. And obviously when we are aware, increasingly aware of lacking something, then the next thing we will try to do is to supply that lack. And that is, I think, where the more recently called esoteric tradition comes in. And if you have an eye for that which is communicated but unsaid, and that's a complex way of putting it. You will find that, for instance, when you look into the mythology of Greece, the mythology of Egypt, the mythology of Rome, which were the three big ones, you find a highly and beautifully poetically organized several systems in that case. But at the same time, you have the feeling that, there is something beyond this. There is something they aren't telling us. There is a secret here somewhere. This is certainly true of Greece, very much true of Egypt, and in a minor, somewhat more superficial way of Rome. But what is it? What are the things that are concealed? We have a psychological component within us that doesn't like anything concealed. When I was a child, or maybe let's say sort of on the pattern of the Easter egg or so, when as a game some things were hidden from me, I was very unhappy. And until I found what I was looking for, I was just really fit to be tied. And of course my parents were fit to be tied because of my reaction to their actions. But whichever the case may be, some of us have an innate feeling that we cannot really get rid of, and that the culture, the extroverted culture, cannot take it away from us. And that is that we have a suspicion that there is something hidden. There is something secret, and that obviously we should like to know that secret. And so I am bringing this around to the ancient Mediterranean world, that there was something of that sort. And then people did busy themselves to discover such a secret. We find, for instance, in ancient Greece, we find that the feeling of reverence for the gods was there. And that was also inherited by Rome. That is where the Latin word pious comes from, which means a pious person. In Rome was someone who believed in the gods and sacrificed, like maybe the Capitol in Greece or something like that. I would rather sacrifice a goose than a chicken, After all, what kind of a god is it that is satisfied with a chicken? And what kind of people are the ones who are satisfied with just chickens? I am greatly tempted to switch over to some recent news item, but I won't do it. But if you bottom me up after the lecture, I tell you what it is I'm talking about. So you see, right now I have my secret. But let us say, when the old Greeks walked along the foot of Mount Olympus, when they looked up into the clouds which covered the mountains, and when they heard, which the Greeks certainly with their disposition would, they heard the laughter of the gods. What a wonderful thing to have. How terrible that in whatever our gods may be, whether they are computers or figures from the Bible, if they are not laughing gods, then there's something wrong. In any event, they would hear the laughter of the gods, and then, because the interaction, in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and certainly ancient Egypt, with the deities was very intimate, very frequent. The Greeks were so certain of the identities, of the character, of the inclinations of their gods and goddesses, as were the Egyptians, who, being a desert country on the edge of Africa, signified that by what? By giving animal forms, animal disguises to the gods. Why? Because a cat is easier to relate to than Jehovah, and a dog too. So that, let's say, the Egyptians humanized their gods by giving them an animal form. When you think about it, it's not such a bad idea, because look how involved we get with animals. And if we can somehow combine the two, as the Egyptians did, there's one lovely passage, and maybe Herodotus or somebody wrote it down. The Egyptians, of course, like other people, would have wars, and some other nation, Nubians or something, were coming and attacking the Egyptians at that particular time, and the invaders thought of a curious stratagem, which is really worthy of a CIA or of something of that sort. And the stratagem was that as they came marching forward, attacking the Egyptian troops, each soldier, in addition to his lance, I'm sure, was carrying a cat, carrying a live cat by its tail, and they were marching forward. The Egyptians threw down their spears and left, because they wouldn't hurt a cat. And so, because the cat was a very sacred animal to the goddess Bast, and then the various forms of it. So that's that's what a good strategist will work out. But let's say in any event, whichever point of view we take, throughout history, there runs an anxiety, a desire, a fervent wish in humanity to discover what we haven't discovered yet. And it was only in the time when navigation became an active possibility, and then subsequently airplanes and things of that sort, that this came then to be deflected to an instrument that would take us to distant places. But you don't need a ship, you don't need an airplane, you don't need a rocket. All you need is to be in touch with your soul. And then you will feel deeply within your soul, you will feel that anxious question: what is the secret? What have they been concealing from me? How can I find the secret which will really fulfill my life, or at least fulfill it more than it is right now? And this was certainly present in Greece. You read the myths of the ancient mythologies and everything. Everywhere you find that there is a looking for something secret. Finally, the Greeks found a way to discover the secrets. And what was that? That were the mysteries. They found ways of approaching the other side of reality through the corresponding interior faculties within us, and then immerse themselves in that which has been secret, which has been concealed, which was not openly available, although it was intimated. And so that every person who was qualified to enter the mystery would be able, if these the qualifications were met, was able to change in consciousness. Well, let's say in the Eleusinian mysteries, to change into Persephone. And it wasn't the kind of sex changes that we have now, but it's a divine change. Because by experiencing the myth of Persephone, her captivity and her liberation, the actions of her mother coming to her and so forth, a certain freedom arose in the person who was able to go through that. But of course, such experiences don't come to us just by saying, hey, I want to be Persephone. Maybe better don't say it too much, and people are going to think that you're undergoing a sex change, but or anything else. But rather that certain powerful interior changes of a lasting character, of a permanent character, have to come about in the individual in order to undergo that particular expansion of consciousness which would change an initiate of the Eleusinian mysteries into Persephone, or someone into another mythical and divine figure, so that certain of these profound and truly ultimately divine components could be experienced by a human being. Now, I don't want to mix different traditions in an unsavory manner, but let us say, maybe we are dealing with something of that sort, at least in part, when we hear the words of Jesus, when he says, "This is my body, and this is my blood, and you shall take this in remembrance of me." It's the mystery. If you partake of this in the proper fashion, if you are properly prepared, if you are able to purify yourself sufficiently within, then you will change. You will experience a great and marvelous change, which I'm sure is not inferior to the one that were, for instance, great Roman and Greek people, Cicero being one of them. If you get a lawyer to become spiritual, you know that's what Cicero was. That's quite an accomplishment. The Romans could do it, but Cicero said that he completely, from the time that he experienced the great mystery in Eleusis until his death, and he committed suicide. He got into his bath and cut his veins. This Marcus Tullius Cicero. Well, he knew that they were after him, which could happen in Rome, and this can happen in Washington too. So, in any event, he says he totally lost his fear of death. When he died, he just went over, and all they found was a bloody bathtub. In any event, all these things and others too, because don't sell the Roman politicians short, because they aspired to a superhuman status, because that will allow them to really run the show in the country. I think let's see, who is the author of I, Claudius? Yes, Robert Graves. So in any event, he had put there's a lot of wonderful scenes there, but there is one when the Dowager Empress, the mother of Augustus, who is of course and so talks to her son. Her grandson. She's Augustus' grandmother. And she says to him, "Oh, grandson, I really would like you to do me a favor." And he says, "Well, what can I do for you, grandmother?" He says, "Grandson, I so very much want to become a goddess." And Augustus says, "Well, we'll see, grandmother, what we can do about that." Because to become a goddess or a demigoddess, demigod, it was symbolic of the attainment of an individual to a higher form of consciousness. So it wasn't just that I'm going to be a very, very important person, but it guaranteed a status in society, but also sort of a status in the cosmos. You see? And that is why the most of the emperors, the Caesars, were addressed as their divinity, because they were so close to the kingdom of the gods. And then some of them, I would say, were close to the kingdom of the demons, like Nero and Caligula. But in any event, the recognition came that there were ways of breaking through the limitations of human nature and to become a demigod or a demigoddess, and ultimately a god and a goddess, and to move onward somehow in this strange sequence. And somewhere connected with that is the secret. Because that is not the secret, because that obviously could be discovered if you became an initiate of one of the major mysteries. But it leads toward the secret. And the secret may have been struck down by Jupiter Tonans. You know, Jupiter Tonans is the thundering Jupiter. He is the one who releases the lightning. And I heard that there is some dry lightning around in the countryside today, so maybe Jupiter is letting his thunderbolts go. But the issue being that there is a reality and perhaps experiences and beings to commune with and to have contact with in communion, who are higher than the gods and the goddesses. So that is the secret. So you see, in a way, the monotheists, like the Jews and as ultimately Christians also, they were not entirely wrong with the one God, but they were wrong with the sequence, that in order to come to the one, you have to go through the many, and even become in your essence realized with the many. And then you may come to the one. And there is we are talking about esoteric tradition. There is an esoteric tradition within the esoteric tradition, that even after a lifetime of searching and reading and things like that, I only sort of discovered it comparatively recently. And that is that the ancient world, and for that matter, all the esoteric systems, knew the story. They knew the story that is in the secret doctrine. They knew other stories, namely that beyond the many lesser realities, including the many gods and goddesses, there is something else. There is a one. And from that one came the many. And we are part of the many. And owing to that fact that we are of the same nature and the same essence as the ultimate reality, we are heirs of that, and we can make contact with it, and we can receive inspiration and insight and liberation from such source. You know how I hit on this idea, and I may have hit on a fancy. Well, if not, I had fun with it. Let's put it that way. But I came to it through the story of Alexander the Great, whom I somehow always had that great reverence for already as a child. You know, and Alexander the Great was of small stature. He wasn't very. He was a very delicate young man when he was young. But let's say one was not. One saying about him in Latin was Magnus Alexander corpore parvus erat. Alexander the Great was a small body. In any event, Alexander, according to everybody in Macedonia where he was born, and all the people who met him later on, was recognized as having, the Christians would say, having undergone being the result of an immaculate conception, because his mother was persuaded to do a very elaborate and very demanding ritual in which his mother was inseminated by a manifestation of the ultimate divinity. The Greeks knew of the One, and sometimes they just referred to him as the One. But at other times, they referred to him by the Egyptian name Amun, which was the ultimate God. And so Alexander's father was Amun, and consequently he was divine. And consequently he was guided and inspired to conduct those immense campaigns clear to the east, where he even went to India and to various other places, and of re-establishing the divine pharaoh's office in Egypt. And then he went into the desert and was seen no more. You remember somebody else at least in the Old Testament who did that? Moses. Moses went into the desert and he was seen no more. He was not chosen to take his people into the promised land. That was for someone else whose name was Joshua, son of Nun. And Joshua is the same name as Jesus, by the way. Interesting synchronicities. And Nun is a fish. So it's Joshua, the son of the fish. What was the emblem of the early Christians? Istos. For a while, people got these placards on their cars, and they sort of gave that up. I always thought it was something that the fish marketeers have instituted. But in any event, there is the secret. He was not able to go in. But he showed the way, and we can go in. And we can follow Alexander into the desert. And somewhere hidden in the desert, all this tremendous length of time, nobody was able to ever find it. And I was friendly with a man who was for a while working us towards, in fairly important capacity at Philosophical Research Society. And when he left there, he organized it. He either had money or he had access to money, which is pretty much the same thing. And he organized a big expedition to Egypt. And he was going to look for and hopefully find the tomb of Alexander the Great. And I told him as we were at the old, let's see, what's the Scottish restaurant down the? Yes. Up here, Los Feliz. So anyway, I told him, look, friend, if you're really a friend of mine, if you find that tomb, then for God's sakes, send me enough money so I can come up and be with you and see it. But of course he didn't find it. However, he found a lot of other interesting things. But let us say the The gods come and go. They come to accomplish a certain task and then they are gone. And where do they go? They go to the One, they go to Amun, they go to the forefather and the foremother of all beings, and await another mission to come down. Is the story of Jesus that much different? Well, in certain respects, of course, an entirely different culture, entirely different person, but from time to time, the messengers of the One, of Amun, come. And when they come, then they accomplish something very important. And if you are lucky, then you should pay attention to them. So here is the conjunction, the combination of monotheism and polytheism. Polytheism is the manifestation of the archons, and not only bad archons, but good ones. So all the gods and the goddesses are an emanation of the original deity, and they can do great and wondrous things, and they are, when properly treated, they are helpful to humanity. But beyond them, there is a single consciousness. There is a single will. That is the single will that has brought everything into existence. From the top down it came and poured itself into empty space. And there came about an incredible, invisible, but unbelievably powerful structure of spirit. And that is really the structure of spirit that through intermediaries in various ways we are still in touch with. So this is the secret, that there is a one. There is a one God. You can even agree with Muhammad that there is only one God. But more than that, this one has embodied himself, herself, has sacrificed himself, herself, by descending the great structure of angels and beings, which incidentally, if you get any impressions of that sort, it's a structure that is vaguely in the shape of a pyramid. And that this is the structure on the bottom of which we are on earth, on this earth, but which is the manifestation of the ultimate oneness. And that being the case, we may also keep in mind that while, as Madame Blavatsky very properly pointed out, that while all is one, everything comes from the same source, everything is of the one nature and of the one substance. But then, that being the case, so what are we doing here? I tell you what we are doing. At least one version of it. We have become conscious of it. We have become aware of it. And as we become aware of it, that is what the Greeks called apotheosis, the becoming divine. So, obviously, once again, I had all kinds of notes and so forth, and I'm not referring to them, but I think this much I can refer to, that you will find in the literature, especially since the 19th century, so the Blavatskys, the Manly Halls, the various people, you will find there that in their esoteric presentation, they always very reverently take recourse to a it's a Greek god name, but became much more than that, and that is Hermes. And therefore, much of the esoteric tradition, I will conclude on that note in a minute, much in the esoteric traditions for a long, long time has been called Hermetic. The way I encountered the word Hermetic when I was a child, that if something was really tightly closed, couldn't open up a bottle or something, which is hermetically closed. And the reason for that is that Hermes was the patron of alchemy, and there are certain activities in alchemy where, yes, you have to have things very, very much closed and very much shut up. But let's say the Greeks, who are the most clever people in the world, the Greeks wanted to have a representation that they could relate to and talk to of the ultimate, of Amun. And when so doing, they chose the god Hermes. So Hermes became the carrier of the divine power, and it was just an ordinary little Greek god, after all there were lots of them. But then he was elevated to the status of the most important messenger of the gods. And if you look at him, he has a helmet. It's all the same as Mercury. The Romans called him Mercury, Mercurius. He has a helmet, and on the helmet are wings. He has sandals, and the sandals have big wings on them. And he is Hermes, Mercury. And Hermes was, as I say, one of the Greek gods, but then he was chosen to be more than that. And then, by some mysterious means, Hermes, well, after all, he has all those wings, was transported to Egypt. And in Egypt, the supreme being willed that Hermes should become fused with one of the Egyptian gods. And that Egyptian god was the god Thoth, the god of communications and wisdom, whose animal form is the ibex bird with a big beak, and who plays a very important role in the Osiris myth and everywhere else. So from then on, he became known as Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice greatest. And what all the thrice greatest, I think he's the greatest of priests, the greatest of kings, and the greatest of magicians. At least that's one way it was now. And Hermes was originally a pretty pedestrian little Greek god out in the countryside, but he became noted by one thing. Somehow the high gods, probably Amun, singled him out for a great, very important role. And from then on, the people were bidden, and he himself did, to build little structures which look vaguely like a pyramid. And they are called a herm, H-E-R-M. So Hermes is the man with the herm. And from then on, after all, he had wings, he could fly to Egypt and everywhere else. He became, you might say, the messenger of the divine power to humanity. And when, toward the end of his career, at least at that time, there were two manifestations of the esoteric traditions in the Middle Eastern realm. And they were the teachings of Hermes, subsequently known as Hermeticism, and the teachings of the Gnostics. And the two were very similar, except that the Gnostics had the good or ill fortune to short-circuit the Christians and not irritate the Christians so that they are not going to be burned at stakes and things of that sort, which was probably quite a good idea. So the Hermetics, as they were called, survived in quite a good shape. And while the Gnostics had to go underground, the Hermetics continued. After a while, they disguised themselves as the alchemists. You know that alchem is an Arabic combination of words, and it means the Egyptian thing. Chem was the land of Egypt because it's dark, and Egypt was noted for the dark mud of the river Nile that annually overflows and covers the large portions of Egypt, and that's where the wonderful cotton fields of Giza and things like that came from, and Egypt became such a very, very important agricultural country until later times. And we shall come to some of that in greater detail later, because we have wonderful scriptures of the Hermetics, and they are a very close parallel to the Gnostics. The only big difference really was that the Gnostic recognized whom they called the latest messenger, who was Jesus, and as such they one would think that the Christians would have been ecstatic about that. No, they said, oh well, now he's trying to steal our Jesus. The case of the stolen Jesus. And so that's where, let's say, that the ongoing conflict went on. But the Hermetics were either lucky or very smart, because inasmuch as they did not infringe in any way on the teachings and on the scriptures of the Christians, you could be a Hermetic and not be, this is a good play on words, you can be a Hermetic and not be a heretic. And this, of course, redounded to the benefit of the Hermetics tremendously. But I don't want to keep you here much longer, but let me just say, maybe stories, poems, artistic things tell things that plain prosaic speech will not disclose. I'll just tell you one. It's from the Poimandres, one of the Hermetic books. In the Poimandres, there is a story about Poimandres, that's his name, and he's the first human. It's sort of like a Hermetic Adam, right? So he's wandering around the earth and has nobody to relate to, no companion. You see, even Jehovah was merciful. At least he created Adam and Eve to be able to have fun together. But in that particular time, there wasn't that. And so he wanders around in this strange world where he is. And he comes to I guess prosaically we might call it a hole in the ground. He comes to a shaft that leads to another world than the one where he came. So he has the Hermetic curiosity, so he looks down that shaft and down below there he sees a beautiful world. It's just like a painting, beautiful, colorful flowers and trees and birds flying around. It's just really, and so he says, I ended up in the wrong place. When it was one of his Gnostic days, he would have said, well, the demiurge has put me in the wrong place. And so he does. He dives down into the shaft and ends up in the other world. And the other world is this world. And that is how the humans came here. And they're still here. At least some of us are. But it is also true that then they are all shape changers. And the name of it was a form of Poimandres, but he had another name that we are more familiar with, particularly among flowers, because he came to be called Narcissus. He saw his own face penetrating that other world, and he went through. And now he ended up in the other world, and he became the father of humanity. So that's why they say, it's one of the reasons why the psychologists invented the word narcissism, because he saw his own face in the water, but through his face he saw this other world, and he fell in love with it and went there. And he is our great-grandfather. This is the Hermetic Adam, you see. And again, the various symbolisms in it are manifold, but there is the indication that we came from somewhere, we were attracted to some place, and then we went there, and perhaps quite often we feel that we were caught. I know I did when I was born. I didn't want to come to this place. I did forgive my mother after a while. What the heck? She was a good woman. But let's say, so this is the cosmology that that Narcissus, Poimandres Narcissus, jumps in and he ends up in the other world. And now he is here and trying to fare well here, and probably planting narcissus flowers. Maybe just to indicate to you the kind of things that are in the Corpus Hermeticum, the corpus of Hermetic books. The other one is also in Poimandres, I think. And there you have this Hermetic student, and he does a big Hermetic ritual wherein he will recognize his own true looks, his own true face. So when he's all done, then he comes into a room, and there's this gigantic figure, like a real giant, looking down at him, and he falls on his face and says, and then the giant says, "All right, don't be so timid. Look at me. Maybe you'll see something familiar." And the man looks up and he sees his own face. So that's bad enough to make you sneeze. In any event, he sees his own face, and which is an indication that if we strive properly and come to our own divine nature, then we see our own greater and higher, more informed, more wise and more powerful self. So the Hermetic writings are full of these these kinds of stories. They're really very, very beautiful. And so I recommend them. I also, with this entire series, I recommend, although there is not that much about Hermeticism in it, but I have found it to be a very good book, and that is our friend Mitch Horowitz's latest book called Modern Occultism. And it starts with the first 2 chapters about Hermes, and it moves from there. But he's very good on all the others, and he has even a reason about it this time. But just like last Friday, I'll have to move some of my projects for next week. But he has the prophecy, the famous Hermetic prophecy in it, where the Hermetic book says how everything is going to go south in Egypt. Oh Egypt, what a terrible fate you have. And how you're beautiful, I mean now just sort of paraphrasing, how your beautiful pyramids and your beautiful gods, and all of that is going away. And so it's really a very, very sad passage, but it's right here, and he has reproduced it in this work as well. Another one that I brought it with me, but I'm not going to do anything with it tonight. But in the full Naj Hammadi, this is the biggest of the Naj Hammadi editions. If you get into a fight against the evangelicals, then you can bring this as a weapon. Because if you throw this at somebody and you hit it right, you're probably going to have a dead opponent. This is the one that was edited by our good friend Marvin Mayer, who was teaching in Orange. Is there a Orange College or college? There is one called Orange College of Orange. In fact, the same institution at one time was here in Eastern Hollywood, right across the street from LA City College. That was the original Orange College. And then it moved to Orange County. Anyway, he was teaching there, and we still had lunch with him one day, and next week he was gone to the prayer room. Great, wonderful man. Anyway, he's the one who edited this one. And here is one script. It's in all the Naj Hammadi collections, maybe with a different title, and that is the Treatise of the Eighth and the Ninth, or the Eighth reveals the Ninth. And it's really worth reading, and what it is, that is a record of a teacher and his pupil of the Hermetic school interacting with each other. The teacher shows the student how to meditate, what to do, and then they're rising up to the 8th level, which is beyond the planets. You see, the 7 are the planets, the 8 is beyond them. So, and it's really a very beautiful treatise, and the pupils keep speaking to the master, what now? And then I'll have it with me next time. But and then at what point I think the teacher tells the student, now we are reaching the 9th, which is past all the planets. And then he tells him, now you can hear the angels sing in silence. And the pupil even asks him, how does anyone sing in silence? You see, it's one of these prosaic-minded students. but the teacher tells him, just listen, you will hear them. So it's a singularly lyrical and beautiful scripture. It's not very long. It's depending on which translation you have, it's the treatise of the 8th and the 9th, and its subtitle was always given as a Hermetic Initiation Discourse. And it's really beautiful. So maybe we'll read some of it, but if you have a Nag Hammadi at home, find it, because no matter in which translation, it's a very wonderful. So let us say then, here we are, and I think that we are on the right track when we say that the essence in us is the essence in the structure of universal being, and ultimately in the structure of Amun, the ultimate Godhead itself. And that therefore, they talk about the brotherhood of humanity and all of that, and now we have to say brotherhood, sisterhood. Maybe in a few years we are going to say niecehood, nephewhood, all these hoods. But let's say, yeah, sure. So the indication being that, just like Blavatsky pointed out in the poetic poem, The Stanzas of Dawn, we all come from the same place. We are all of the same essence and of the same nature, and to discover that and to live that, that is our calling, that is our destiny, and that is our happy glory. And more of this kind of material, more of the Hermetic writings next time. So thank you very much, folks. I'm glad you came.